want to welcome you to our City Commission study session. We ask that you turn off and silence your cell phones. Meetings are televised every day on Channel 2 at 7 p.m. and at midnight. First item on the agenda is presentation of the 2018 audit.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, I'd like to introduce Audrey Oderman from Meishauser and Company, who is the city's newest auditing firm, and of course our finance director Ruby Moline to go over the 2018 audit.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
So, thank you. I am here to go over. I'm here to go over the audit, and you can stop me as we go if you have questions. Sure. Okay, I am going to start on page 1. It's a logical place to start. It's actually page 1 at the bottom of the page. Get confusion on that sometimes? Yep. Page 1. Okay. So this particular page goes through and it talks about management's responsibility in regard to the financial statements. Our responsibility as auditors, the standards that we use to audit, and then it also talks about the opinion, which obviously is what you want to know. And that's at the bottom of page 1. It gives an opinion on each component of the financial statement, and each one of those components has received an unmodified opinion, so that's the highest opinion the financial statements can receive. It speaks to the work that Ruby does and the directive that you give her and her staff throughout the year, not just when we're here for that period of time. They have very good controls in place, and she asks a lot of good questions throughout the year, so we really appreciate that. It's always nice to not be surprised when you come out for the audit. We go on to page 2. You see at the top, there's an emphasis of matter header at the very top. That's just drawing your attention to some note disclosures later on in the notes. There was a new accounting standard that put some new note disclosures in these financial statements, and so we'll talk about those later. But there's no reason to be afraid of that emphasis of matter header. That just means, hey, look for something new, and that's in the note disclosures this particular year. I'm going to jump ahead to page 4, and that's management's discussion and analysis. This to me is a really interesting part of the financial statement because it's Ruby's opportunity to go through and really look at the year, the activity that happened during the year, whether there were new debt instruments that were issued or big capital projects that occurred. It's her opportunity to go through and say, hey, look what happened, look what the city did this year financially, and compare it to the prior year. It's the only place in the financial statements that you'll get a comparative analysis of this year compared to the prior year. So I encourage you to really read that. It's an interesting part of the financial statement. We move on to page 18. These 2 pages, 18 and 19, are the only 2 pages in the financial statement where we pull all the financial information into 2 pages. It's the closest thing you're going to get to a traditional business financial statement. So you have the statement of net position, which you can compare to a balance sheet, really. And it's going to have all of the assets, including capital assets. This is the only place you'll see these. And it's going to have all of the liabilities, including all of your long-term liabilities. And those are the only pages in the financial statements that have the long-term liabilities listed there as well. Page 19 is probably the closest thing you're going to get to a traditional income statement. And you're going to see expenses by function, and you're going to see the categorization of revenues by those expenditure functions too. So you can see what particular departments generated charges for services or operating grants. And you'll see all the property tax on there, all of the revenue expenditures on that one page. If we move to page 20, what this page represents really is page 18, but we're pulling off the capital assets and we're pulling off the long-term debt. And so on this page, what it's supposed to really display is a more current resource view. What current resources do you have to cover the expenditures of the city? And what liabilities you have that are due within the first 12 months or the next 12 months of the year. On to page 21, it's another income statement, but it's not showing any long-term expenses or any long-term receivables. It's really, again, just a more current view of the financial health of the city. Okay. If we move on to page 30, we're doing a little bit of a jump here, but that's where the note disclosures start in these financial statements. There's a lot of really useful and good information in here. There's also a lot of information in here. So there's a couple of notes that I want to point out to you. just because of the volume of information in those notes. The first one is on page 44, and that has to do with your capital assets. In this particular note, you're going to see all the capital assets categorized by the type of asset that they are. Things like infrastructure, which includes your streets and your bridges, and any sewer lines or water lines or those types of things that you have within the city. And then it's going to show you depreciation by the different categories of assets as well. We move to page 49. This is probably the biggest note in the financial statements, and that has to do with long-term debt. So any debt instrument that the city has agreed upon or entered into is included on these pages. There's general obligation bonds, so you're going to see interest rates for every series. You're going to see when the final maturity is due, and you're going to see the payment plan for those debt instruments. The various types of debt instruments that the city does have is general obligation bonds, potentially temporary notes, capital leases. You'll see on page 55, there's some other things that are maybe not what you would really normally think of as long-term debt, but they're long-term liabilities, and they're things like compensated absences. That's the vacation and sick pay that you're paying your employees, the net pension liability. That's the portion of the CAPERS and KP&F pension liability that's allocated to the city. And then there's other post-employment benefits, and that's the next note I want to jump to. So if we jump to page 70, remember that I talked about that new accounting standard that was issued for this particular year. You've had post-employment benefit liabilities in your financial statements in prior years, but this particular year, the accounting standard board has said, hey, let's calculate that differently. Let's look closer at trend analysis. Let's look at mortality rates. Let's look at involvement of your retirees in your healthcare system and really determine what we think that potential liability is. And so on page 70, you're going to see much more detailed note disclosures, and you're going to see how those particular liabilities could change if little indicators change. If healthcare trends change 1% one way or the other, what would that do to liability? So you're going to see a lot of really detailed notes in here, and it's providing some information to your users, much more than it has ever been provided before. So that's a really long note. There's a lot of detail in it. It goes all the way through to page 77. Now I'm going to jump forward quite a bit. There's a lot of good information in between the pages that we are now and where we're jumping to. And a lot of that information has to do with individual funds. If there's a particular fund you want to look at, you're going to find it in these financial statements. If it's budgeted, you're going to find a budget comparison for it as well. But we're going to jump to page 112, which is the stat section. And every time I say this, somebody laughs at me, but this is my favorite part because I think it's really so much information is here. Cities change drastically in a 10-year period, and it's not just financial, it's the demographics as well. It's who's living in your city and how are they financially doing. It's a lot of that information that's in your financial statements, and there's 10 years worth of all that history in this section of the financial statement. So often you may have a constituent that may call and say, well, how has this changed in the last few years? You might find it in this part of the financial statement, so I encourage you to look at this. If for no other reason, it's very interesting. You live here, and there's interesting things about your city that you may find in these pages of the financial statements. We're going to jump forward a little bit again to page 144, and that's a special part of the audit called the single audit. Any entity that receives and spends more than $750,000 in federal aid has to have this special audit. So we go through and we look at all of your major programs, and those are the large programs where you've spent more than $750,000 in aid. You only have one of those kinds of programs in this particular city, and that's your Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And so that one gets picked on quite a bit because we have to make sure that we're covering that program and really looking at that major program because of the volume of transactions that go in and the amount of money that's spent in that particular program. We worked with Pat pretty extensively in his office. He gave us a lot of information, and he knew all the answers, let me tell you. He's run that department for a very long time, and he runs it really quite well. Yes. Yeah. And so we're looking at things like, we're not just looking at invoices that might go through and get paid through that program, but we're also looking at applications that he's had to review and assess to determine if people are eligible to be in the program. He has to report at least monthly back to HUD on a lot of statistical information, and we have to verify that that's all supported on a sample basis. And so you can see the results of this particular audit on page 148. If we had noticed any control issues, whether it be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, or if we had noticed any compliance issues, you'd see that we would indicate that on page 148. You'll see in the middle of the page that the program is an unmodified opinion, so that's the highest opinion that the program can receive. And if you go on to page 149, you're going to see that we didn't even have any minor findings in that particular program. Okay? He does an excellent job and got us the information very quickly when we were there. On page 150 is the second letter of communication that we have in these financial statements. And it talks about internal controls and the work that the city does in revolving around internal controls, separation of duties, and making sure that the transactions, they're very well controlled throughout the year. We didn't note any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. On page 151, you'll also note that we didn't notice any non-compliance as it relates to the financial health of the city. If we go on to page 152, this letter just summarizes what I talked about on the federal programs, that it's an unmodified opinion and that we didn't have any findings over the program. Do you have any questions for me?
Fantastic.
So you got an A++?
I would say, yes. I like a guy who asks me for the grade. I like it. Yes.
That was an excellent presentation.
Yes,
good.
make it very simple and
Yes.
easy to find what we
Good.
need. Thank
How
you.
long were you here down in the city as far as conducting the
We
audit?
were here for a solid week and a half, and then we came back out to work on some capital asset work later on.
And when did you get started?
It was they start to run together a little bit. I'm gonna say April.
Okay,
Yeah, it was the
that's
early
fine.
part of
I
April.
just wanted
Early
to
part of April.
Get a feel for that. How about on page 44 in terms of the depreciation for the buildings, improvements, machinery and equipment infrastructure? Do you have standard depreciation schedules for that you apply, or how's that work?
So they have depreciation schedules that they give us to audit, and we do things like we recalculate it to make sure that they're using industry standard useful lives and depreciation methods. So if we would have come in and looked at it and said, you're not depreciating that quick enough, or that's not a realistic useful life, we would have noted that in the
Okay.
sample that we selected.
Okay. And the controls, you said the
Yes.
internal controls are good to go?
Yes, yes.
And you may remember, Commission, I'll just, a couple quick comments. When we switched to the Munis system, one thing that we had to work through was internal controls, because through efficiencies of Munis, we had more people doing more tasks, but then we had some concerns about the control side effect of that. So Ruby, I really have to commend Ruby specifically among her staff for working on internal controls and getting that worked out. It helped a lot to bring our Deputy Finance Director on board. Since it's only a 4-person department, I'll just mention that a lot of the work in this, or all of the work in this, goes to Ruby, Brandon Mills, Karen Parker, and Stephanie Alexander in the finance department.
That's good.
So, and I should probably mention that we audit a lot of larger cities this size or a little bit larger, and probably about 35 of those cities, and only 2 of them write their own financial statement, and your city is one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
And you're located in Lawrence?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments?
No, great report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good, Mr. Persinger?
Excuse me?
Are you good?
Am I good?
Ready for the next?
That was your thing.
What?
That was your thing.
Not my thing. I was talking to Mr. Kramer about it. I'm smart enough to know that you hire people to make sure
Yeah.
I'm smart enough to know that I don't understand it, but it's his responsibility to make sure it's right.
I got you. Next item on the agenda, 2019 Riverfront Park Campground operations.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, I'm going to turn this over in a minute to our Parks and Recreation Director, Steve Grant, and I also believe his Park Superintendent, Brian Bailey, is here. There's been a lot of information going around about the campground, some questions from residents, and a lot of questions from people outside of the community who have reservations. I wanted to bring it to the commission. I think we're at a point that we want to talk about that and talk about a recommendation. Keep in mind that we're only talking about 2019. Any kind of discussions about the future of the campground are valid, but would have happen at another time. So I wanted Steve to walk through sort of the process we go through when a flood is imminent and what they've done this year. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you, and then at the end we'll sort of talk about our recommendation with the park.
All right, thanks, Paul. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I'll just kind of go through everything we do as the city manager was indicating when we know that the river's coming up, and then kind of specifically this year and where we're at and how we got to where we're at and where we may go forward. Just kind of give you an idea. So our typical camping season begins April 1st through October 31st. This is a reoccurring issue that we deal with. The water has come up into the riverfront campground 7 out of the last 12 years to a certain extent, at least to a point where we've had to evacuate. Sometimes it's just barely comes in, but we still evacuate if the river's coming in. This year, obviously, like 2011 was a much different animal. It came up and it came up extensively. Came up before we had opened the campground. It crested about the 3rd week of March, and during that time, it was 8 feet deep in the campground. Fortunately, these aren't flash floods; these are predicted. We get pretty good prediction system through NOAA, and then transferred to us through the Leavenworth County Emergency Management. So we do make preparations when the predictions are this high. Some of the preparations we did this year is every campsite down there has its own electrical pedestal. We hired an electrician to go down and remove those pedestals and actually protect the wires so that they could be submerged underwater and there'd be no damage to the wiring. And then, so that's the state that the electrical still resides in at this time. It has been removed. When the water came up in March and it dropped anywhere from 2 to 3 feet of silt load throughout the park, that's one issue that we deal with. The predictions from NOAA through Leavenworth County Emergency Management is they predict that the river's going to stay at a high level all summer. Our original outlook was we'll get our crews in there as we're able to and see if we can't get it reopened, which we started to do towards the end of March, and then the river came back up the first week I said March, sorry. We started doing May, and then the river came right back up the first week of June, and again was 6 feet deep in the campground. So from that point, we did receive further predictions through Leavenworth County Management that they had received from NOAA saying they predict for the rest of 2019 what they're called moderate flood stages for the Missouri River due to high release levels up north at Gavin's Point, as in conjunction with higher than average rainfall. So that's where they come up with predictions for the rest of the summer. As the silt gets deposited in the campground, it has to sit there for a while and dry out before we can really even work with it with our equipment to move it and to scrape it off the pads and try to get back down to the normal ground level. It is at a state right now where it is dried out to that point where we can work with it. However, the reason for the discussion tonight is, does it make sense to go in there with city forces, city equipment, and put all the electrical infrastructure back together? It did get high enough where it got into our restroom facility, and it got about 8 to 10 inches deep on our hot water heaters. We have 2 hot water heaters in there for the shower facilities.
How that was affected, yeah.
Right. So I don't, and that we have not had tested yet, which we will obviously have to have done by someone with heating and cooling knowledge. I don't know if water gets up 8 feet on a hot water heater, if that affects it or not. Obviously, all the gas had been disconnected. There were no pilot lights, anything like that. And it also got up to our electric room heaters, into those a little bit. There's an electric room heater in each individual shower house also. So that's kind of where we sit right now is with the predictions going forward, throughout the rest of the year. Does it make sense to spend the money and the resources to go in there to try and clean it up when there's predicting that it's a better than average chance that it's gonna come up back into the campground at some extent?
How much has already been spent?
Well, we don't have a lot invested in it. We only a couple $100 to.
You haven't fixed it yet.
Right,
Haven't fixed
a
it.
couple $100 to get all of those pedestals, ready
Yeah,
for,
that
to
was,
be
that was
submerged.
pre-flood though.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah, we
So
had that
nothing's
done.
done since then, and it would be, how much would it cost to fix it back up again?
Well, and that's, a lot of
Well,
that's
you have
gonna,
The water heaters probably will have to be replaced, I would bet.
correct. And so if we start talking about replacing the 2 hot water heaters, and we don't know about the electric heaters, all that's gonna cost money to have, to
But
even
not
have
only
it.
that, the manpower to
Right,
scrape everything out when it fills back up again.
correct.
To me, it sounds like a waste of time for this year.
I'd suggest wait till fall, we'll begin to clean up on it. Leave it set during the rest of the summer months.
The other consideration we had is, we do have a lot of seasonal or pass-through campers who come from all over the country, stop here for a day or 2 or 3,
Yeah.
and they're getting a lot of calls, are you gonna open, because they're planning their summer trips and their fall trips and stuff like that. So we're hoping, if that's the direction the commission goes, that we could get that information out so that everybody else could make alternate plans.
I mean, that's my feeling. I think it's really the only choice that we have, unless you wanna dump 5 or 10,000 in the cleanup, and then 2 weeks later,
Have to do it
you
again.
gotta do it again, so.
Do we have a campground director now?
So let's see.
Yeah, we have, the same, campground manager.
He's a local.
Correct.
So he could, in theory, he could come back this weekend if you wanted.
He absolutely could.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
we have a contract in place with him, and fortunately, he is local, and he's seen it flood many times before,
Yeah.
so he's understanding of it.
And of course, you can't camp there, I mean, even overnight, can you, when it's been, I mean, there's no services, but I mean, even when there's no services in there,
blocked
you still
off.
can't,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because of the silt, right?
correct. There's
it would be
some areas
impossible to
still where
drive
it's 2 to 3 feet deep.
Yeah,
and
I just don't think it's a good idea to open it this year.
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
That would be part of the effort. You'd have to get rid of the silt, right? I mean,
Correct.
you have to do something. So how long would it take? I don't think it's feasible either, but how long an effort would it take to get it back to where it would need to be? I mean, just in terms of time.
I think if we were able to denote a full park maintenance crew to it and get all of the contractors lined up to replace, we should probably get it ready within a couple weeks, I would say. Then that's barring no rain, good weather and all that.
I
Right.
wonder if it would be possible when we have our festival to get it ready right before that. People may be coming into town for that and camping.
Well, I was gonna say, that's,
Oh,
but I don't know if would that be feasible if we're not gonna do anything right now? I think that would be a really good idea. I just don't know, whether,
If we're expecting.
if
any
we had that
more-
campground available during Camp Leavenworth, that would be nice, but
But do we expect to have, it ought to depend, I guess, if we expect to have flooding right at
Yeah, we
this
would.
fall.
Right. I know the reservoirs are full and they're continuing large releases. I think now it's gonna be dependent on rain, if that sort of accelerating factor. And it is at, I think that and Second Street are at the same level, so they're the first things that flood in the city.
There's 13 sites there for campers, so that's what we would be potentially losing,
Yeah. Yeah.
for availability wise.
How big is the footprint there? Is it a couple acres, anybody know?
Well, it goes back into the woods. We own back into the woods a little ways too. I'm not exactly sure of the exact acreage of just because it's so linear.
Do you have any idea, or Mr. McDonald or Mr. Bailey, on how many cubic yards of silt we have to clean up? I remember when the landing park was, it was huge.
I think the park's approximately 10 acres. But the material is, I don't know how you would estimate.
Yeah, we're gonna have to estimate it as part of this FEMA recovery thing, we'll have a better number on it, but it's a substantial number. Typically, you're gonna focus your recovery effort in the campground itself, you're not gonna go out into the woods and
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it varies throughout the campground. There's some areas where it's only an inch or two deep, and then there's some areas where it's pushing 3 feet deep. So.
Can we get any, money from FEMA for this, or, I mean, is there, just in general, is there some program that we could get, maybe some?
I haven't had a chance to fully review this with the city manager, but there is a FEMA flood disaster that we had our kind of team meeting with the initial FEMA intake people. The flood disaster begins after March. So all of the flooding that was done has not occurred within the disaster window.
Oh, wow.
So there's a couple of ways that we can discuss this with our project manager that FEMA's going to sign us to see if we will be reimbursed for recovery costs. But that is not a for sure done deal
Right,
at this point.
but we are gonna make the inquiries and.
And the broad reimbursement, should it occur, typically is 75% FEMA, 10% from the state, and the city's responsible for 15%.
And we start our first team meeting with flooding, they still call them 214 forms.
Yes.
Everybody, all departments are responsible for tracking all flood-related labor, equipment, and expenditure. So they start that, we have that from March, it's just a
Yes.
matter of if it's going to be eligible for reimbursement.
So we don't want to waste resources.
We're gonna clean it up for sure, and,
Yeah.
we'll do it this fall. We were just thinking that sort of it's hanging out there as an open question, both for people locally, but then also for campers making their summer plans. So we'd start the cleanup stuff because it's dry, and so, we need to get that out anyway, but sort of officially for 2019, closing it, and making that so it's not a question that comes up a bunch.
Yeah, we get quite a few inquiries. People, was like, will you be open by, the end of July? Like, well, we don't know for sure. And we've been doing that for the last, couple months ever since. And now with, Labor Day coming up, and August is a pretty big, August is a pretty big travel month before kids go back to school. It's just, the thought process is, give them a definitive answer so they can make plans.
Correct.
Yeah, so that they don't, we'll let you know.
So what's the fee in order to go camping down there? I know
It's
probably a small fee.
$15 for a pad with electric and hookups and everything.
That's pretty good.
Per night, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Save me some rent.
I think the right decision is let
Close it.
people know 2019 is not gonna be available.
And
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, it just, there's too many maybes that still may happen. You look
Yeah.
at the river today and it's
Unfortunately.
This will be back
It's
up
pretty
over
high,
the weekend,
and-
right?
for mid-July, it's very, very high.
Yep. I agree.
I don't think we really have any
Yeah,
choice,
right.
unfortunately.
Unless you can get a flood wall down there like you were at the Kansas. I somehow don't think we'll get there.
Okay, I don't need any formal action, that's good, that's sufficient enough.
Good, thank you.
Okay,
Okay, thank you for the discussion.
Thank you.
thanks, Steve.
All right. Next item on the agenda, review city infrastructure manual.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, one of the internal projects that we've been working on for the last year or two is creating a city infrastructure manual. This is part of the larger idea to make the city an easier place to do business in, do business with, be more customer-friendly, contractor-friendly, provide more information. This also falls under the same category as a lot of the stuff that we did, but we're memorializing in policy or in manuals. So what they're gonna be presented tonight is the Public Works Department Director and Deputy Director will go through a draft city infrastructure manual that we would have a process, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We've had a firm review it. It was drafted by staff, a firm review it. And then we'll have a series of meetings. We'll have some meetings with contractors. They'll go through it, give us feedback. But I'm gonna let them talk a little bit about the genesis of the project and kind of where we're going and what's included in it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, this has been been somewhat of a lengthy effort to get this put together. It's real hard to write down things that you think everybody knows that what you're doing and why. But as we focused on, we realized that it is really good to have things written down. This is not the be-all, end-all document. This is not a giant, thick book of specs. This is more a guideline or a presentation of what to expect if you're going to do this type of work in Leavenworth, because we rely upon KDOT specifications, and they're fairly detailed and fairly comprehensive. We also rely heavily on American Public Works Association specifications, especially for stormwater design and calculations. So this is to have an effort to have a single document that we can hand out to developers and say, what are you expecting from me? We've had similar documents in the past, but you look at them and you realize they were pulled out from other documents the city had, and some out of the ordinances, and some were out of the planning documents, some of them were out of engineering studies that were done. And so we tried to identify the issues that we get asked a lot. There's some things in here that are changed somewhat from the way that we have traditionally done business. We think it's a good time to make these changes, particularly as there's not been a lot of development activity like subdivisions, particularly in recent years. So now is a good time to make changes, so we're not trying to deal with if you were approved last month, you got a different set of rules than if you were approved this month. And two key things that we've brought out is we have substantially increased the asphalt thickness for all new streets, residential streets, collector streets, and arterial streets. We suspect we'll hear from our developers that we're being unreasonable, but they don't have to pay to repair them. City taxpayers do. So we wanted to do something to make our streets more durable. And then one of my favorite, and Mike Hooper has taken it on with a vengeance, is subdivisions that never build all the lots, and you end up with sidewalks that are never constructed because there were never building permits on the vacant lot. And we have proposed that there would be a sidewalk bond posted for a 2-year period for the developer if he does not have building permits on all of the lots that would have had a sidewalk constructed on them as part of the building permit. They would be required to go back in and construct those missing sidewalks. And we've tried to address a lot of those over the years with our sidewalk program. There's still a few holes out there that we haven't quite got to, but we found most of them. So those are two big changes that are in there. You don't have to tell us you like them or don't like them, but if you'd like to talk about them, we'd be happy to do that. As Paul Kramer mentioned, we do expect to have some informal meetings with people that we expect to be using this to see what their feedback is. We'll try to assimilate that and bring back at least another draft version internally, time or two, and then present it back to the commission. Hopefully, I hate to set deadlines, but this is good work to do later in the year and have it in place when things hopefully start happening in the spring. The document, there's an index, what we expect for streets, how to build them, some specifics on sidewalks to remove some of the flexibility that we see, what to expect from curbing and driveway entrances, excavations in the right of way, how are they supposed to repair utility cuts or somebody repairs the sewer. It's usually, currently, a lot of these are case-by-case basis with our staff and our inspectors. I think we get to where we want to be, but it's nice, as was mentioned, to have it in a book and say, here, this is what we expect.
I like that you had brick sidewalks still able to be put into the historic districts.
Currently, we're proposing
Where
that
they
they would
already
be, they could be maintained, restored, replaced, or repaired in historic district. We're not expecting that there will be an effort to build new brick sidewalks outside of the historic
Right,
district.
makes sense.
And I'd say this is a nice stone, but it's not the hardest stone you've ever met. There's probably flexibility in here on any number of projects or questions, but at least we have a place to start the discussion. Clarified some things with street lighting, and then stormwater, basically, we're focused back into the stormwater guidelines that we have. We specifically reference, again, the APWA section. You
Real
look through-
quick,
Yes, sir.
hey, can you speak briefly about the sidewalk program, the cost share program?
Now, the sidewalk cost share program is mentioned in here because we get a lot of calls about who's going to fix my sidewalk, and people are surprised for the most part when we say the sidewalks are the property owner responsibility to maintain. That's not just the city ordinance, that's a state law. And one of the sales tax elections, and I forget which one, was when the city commission created a sidewalk program. That was part of our commitment to the citizens, taxpayers, was we will have an opportunity, if you have a sidewalk that you want to replace or you want to build one, you'll have opportunity to get some of your money that we set aside for this that comes from the sales tax. So we will pay, was it $5 a square foot?
$2.50 a square foot.
For projects that if a property owner has some bad sidewalk, and this is the public sidewalk that runs parallel to the street. And we're not talking about the sidewalk that runs up to your porch, we're not talking about the one that's in your backyard around your pool. This is the sidewalk that your neighbors will walk on if they're walking in front of your house. If it needs repair and you would like to do that, we ask that you come tell us you would like to participate in the program. We'll help prepare an estimate and tell you the rules of the program, which are very simple, and get an estimate from a contractor. We'll review that estimate, and we will basically, we don't care so much what the estimate is. We just want to take that estimate and say we will pay $2.50 a square foot for this work that's described in that estimate. Then they have to do the work, or the work's done. There's a contractor has to say that they've been paid for the work. Then we will process a check for the property owner.
Mr. McDonald, Mr. Hooper, that $2.50 I know used to be approximately 50% of the cost, but now is it about $6 a square foot to put in, if you had to ballpark it?
It's running anywhere from $6 to $10 a square foot.
Okay, so it came from 25 to 40% of the cost that
Yeah.
the homeowner can recoup. Okay.
Right.
Or
And-
property
and
owner.
if need be, we can revisit the level of matching. We raised it a number of years ago. We created some categories for particularly commercial properties. If they invest, I forget the percentage, back into their business, and they want to do something with the sidewalks, I think they get the whole $5 a square foot if it's
Okay.
a substantial investment in commercial property in the community.
Is there quite a few people that still use this program?
Yes.
Yeah,
10 a year,
it
maybe.
varies from 5 to 15 a year, and we'll do anywhere from 5,000 to about 25,000 a year on reimbursement.
In terms of money that comes
Yeah.
from the city.
Yeah,
we-
we set back 25,000 a year
that's good.
for the cost share program.
I would be amenable to looking at some future time in terms of whether we want to increase the, the cost share a little bit, but
Yeah, most people don't feel the urge to come ask for reimbursement for 10 square foot of sidewalk.
Right.
They're usually gonna work on that on the weekend themselves and without a permit, and they don't want us involved with that.
Yeah.
But this program does require a permit and an inspection, and it really, it's a requirement that it be approved prior to the work being done. So we work through that quite a bit.
Right.
how about, you mentioned that, and I think, increasing the asphalt thickness is a good thing, particularly in terms of hopefully the longevity of the streets and the roads, but did you mention that some contractors may not like that? I mean,
The
they're just gonna bid to
developers
the
will-
specifications of
The developer community will probably resist.
Oh,
These are fairly substantial changes. Basically, we are proposing,
developer,
we're currently, 4 inches of asphalt? And
Yeah,
we're
we're-
proposing to go to, it's 8 or 6?
8 in residential areas, and these are not really different from any other city in
good.
the Kansas City metropolitan area.
Good.
We're basically trying to bring our standards up
Sure.
to what the others are.
I'm glad to see that.
Yeah.
How about, Yeah, I think that's great. Markings, road, street markings, I didn't see anything in here about that. Would that be something we want to cover in this manual or not? I mean, it is, I think it's important from the standpoint of the appearance and the aesthetics of the city. I mean, in terms of, if you do a good job on the road. then-
Markings are forever, and so you rarely see, well, we generally don't require anything on residential streets.
Right, I'm just talking
But,
main
but
streets.
on the collector and arterial streets, there's gonna be a plan, there will be markings and such. And it's certainly possible to add, to pair it in here with appropriate markings. We've argued amongst ourselves, what is the right marking? Is it paint? Is it better paint? Is it thermoplastic? Is there different epoxies? But, yeah, collector and arterial streets would be expected to have some level of pavement markings. Typically, if you have a stop sign on a residential street at a collector or an arterial street intersection, you'll have a stop bar and often a crosswalk. Not always. But
Well, I would
every
recommend-
one you have,
This
you
really
gotta,
addresses infrastructure, though.
That's part of the infrastructure, the lines and the markings on the street. I mean, that's the last thing that's done.
Yeah.
Now, whether you need to capture it in here, I don't know. I mean,
How
it's
the mar-
something that's what?
How the markings are laid out and
Yeah.
how they're designed is covered under the manual of uniform traffic control devices.
Okay.
And so any of the markings are required to meet.
You might
That
want to make a
manual and
reference,
stuff.
then maybe you don't include it, but you make a reference to it in here.
Yeah.
Because I do consider it part of the deal. It's the last major step that I think is important to the roads and the way the city looks, bottom line. So,
Yep.
as far as I'm concerned. You have a lot of acronyms in here, so I would just suggest, sometimes you kind of spell them out, sometimes you don't. So I would just spell all of them out.
some
'cause
consistency.
it's like the military, a lot of acronyms, but.
It's easy to follow. That's one thing is different than this, looking at the standards and all that other stuff. This is a lot easier to follow.
You know, we tried to make it more of a narrative, so people kind of know, you don't want to look
It's
through a
good for the
giant.
general public to be able to see this, yes.
What we're expecting, we expect a street to have curbs.
Right.
That's, some people don't know that.
Right.
That sort of thing. So, we've learned a lot in the last 10, 15 years on using different methods of constructing streets. One thing we've taken out of here is concrete streets. They have been nothing but trouble on many, it's a big cyclical thing. Concrete streets were great, and then they all fell apart. They fixed the problems. That was, 30 years ago. So everyone went back to concrete streets. They all fell apart. And right now, our staff, and me specifically, I'm not recommending we build any concrete streets. They haven't convinced me the second time that they've got it fixed.
Jeez.
That's good.
So that's, concrete streets are specifically not mentioned in here as a typical street section. We talk about sidewalks on one side of residential streets and two sides of collector and arterial streets. That's been our standard for some time, but we wanted to mention it in here. And briefly, sidewalks, or brick sidewalks, it's kind of fun. There's a lot of annoying details about how to finish a sidewalk, how deep your trowel needs to be in the corners. Every concrete finisher has their way they want to finish concrete. So he said, that's great. I'm glad you're a skilled laborer, because here's how we would like you to do that. And that's helped a lot. We also have relied on for 10 years, this, you see it in here, KCMMB, which is a consortium of manufacturers and communities in the greater Kansas City area to set a specification for concrete that will theoretically prevent it from falling apart. And that is, the requirement for many years was that it use granite rock for the main aggregate and not limestone. Simply put, the limestone that's available to build concrete sidewalks or streets or whatever is not durable enough and not predictable enough to be adequate. Last year, or maybe 2 years, we changed to allow trap rock, which is a hard chert, quartzy type rock, as an alternate I think we talked about it at a commission meeting, but it's fascinating. Most of downtown Kansas City, Missouri has trap rock sidewalks that are older than the buildings that are behind them in many cases. So we found that was acceptable and brought some competition into the sidewalk construction. Valley gutters, we kind of made a mark. We want them bigger than we have in the past. That's another change. Where the streets come together, we do not have an underground storm sewer system to get the water. As the streets have crowns and you have intersecting streets, you need to get the water out of the low area. The valley gutters, how you do that, we found that bigger is better. And we put some numbers in there to specify that. Driveways are always a popular subject. Zoning, planning and zoning has an interesting set of rules and regulations that we've tried to work with. There's historically been a set of rules and regulations in driveway widths that came out of engineering. Every time you think you've got it married, you know what each other's expecting, you find somebody that finds a wrinkle in the fabric and comes up with new ideas. So we try to spell out what we expect for driveways, and if there are problems, we'll work with planning and zoning to make sure we're all speaking with one voice. Because they have pretty specific rules on driveways, generally pertaining to the private property side. Our rules generally pertain to the public right-of-way side of things. And it's one driveway. How do you build it? So, then we have some ADA stuff in there. Compaction, things are a lot better utility-wise than they were in the past. Have you had no recent horror stories, I don't think.
No recent horror stories. We are beefing up a little bit on how they have to do their backfill and their street cuts, just to make sure they get them right. We don't end up with the problems of the utility cuts settling like we have in the past.
Do you address marking of utilities before projects, or is not the document to do that in?
That's required by state law.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's,
I mean,
what do you include and not include?
I'm asking you,
Yeah,
okay?
that's not
It is a
in
big
here.
deal. I mean,
Yeah,
but it may
and
not be appropriate to be included in this document, but it is a big deal.
It is.
And
Sure it
I've
is.
seen it at work when it's not done.
Bad things that have happened. So
What
it's not
What
included
does
in your
CCTV means?
closed circuit TV.
Closed circuit TV.
That's one of the acronyms we'll get
Yep.
a table of.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Quick question, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Hooper. Explain, maybe for me, the driveway entrances. Can't be more than 30 feet wide on a curb and guttered street, but if it's a blacktop street, no curb and gutter, it's only 20 feet wide. Just, what's the reasoning behind it? I'm not questioning it, I just want to understand it.
The maximum tube width that our street crews can clean when they go out to clean these driveway tubes and everything is 24 feet.
Oh, okay. So when you have the tube underneath it for drainage.
Yeah.
And when you say maximum 30 feet, that's there, but it can flare out closer to the house, obviously.
Right, once
Yeah.
it gets onto private property, it can flare out.
Okay,
And then they have rules about that in planning and zoning.
right, I understand that.
But on the curb streets, we're not cleaning out driveway tubes. They're not trying to connect driveway tubes between adjoining properties, creating private storm sewer systems.
Okay, I understand, that makes sense, now. Thank you.
I think it's a good document. I think that in your policy statement, it's got the reason for the document, or I think that some of that language should go at the beginning of the document, just from the standpoint of telling people what the document's about. But you have most of that, I think, in the policy statement. I just don't see it in the manual.
I think it does need a cover, an introduction or
Right,
a
yeah,
cover.
that would be an appropriate place to cover that.
This is just a draft, and you're gonna get input from all the construction companies, so
Yeah, you may too.
I'm sure it's fine.
I know you will on the asphalt.
Yes, we will.
Well, the construction companies will love it, the developers. right?
Developers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so we'll bring this back in a couple months after we've gotten good feedback and an eventual adoption of the city commission.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
2019 website demonstration.
Website.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, as we change seats here, I'll just briefly, the website's up, the website's operational, I think everybody knows that. This isn't just a general overview of the whole process. What I asked Taylor to do tonight in 10 or 15 minutes is just show you a couple of the enhanced processes that you can do on the website. What do you get from this new website besides just the look and feel? So he's just gonna run through some stuff and sort of give you some information and those watching, and we go from there.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commission. I do have a few facts about our new website that we launched last month. We had about 7,235 users last month, and we actually expect that to double. We finally have everything working completely smoothly. The first week or so, we had a few issues with our domain name. You can access it from lvks.org or leavenworthks.org. We're trying to maybe move towards a branding just so people know that they're going to Leavenworth, Kansas. 62% of the people visiting were on a mobile device. That's huge. 32% were on a desktop and 6% were on a tablet. So as you can see, the trend, everyone using mobile devices, it is really happening. Our top pages that have been visited are the home page and the jobs page. So the neat thing with the analytics with our new website, we're able to see the locations of people, the type of device, the browser they're using. It's really neat, and I'll try to start reporting some of that data in my weekly report for you. So if you're on a mobile device, our new website is fully responsive, so that's what it's going to look like. You have all of the functionality that you would typically have from the desktop site, so you can access everything easily and efficiently from your mobile device. But it is fully responsive, so no matter if you're on a tablet,
So much
whatnot.
easier to use than before.
So anyway, this is the home page, and it does have a lot of features on here as you scroll down. But I'm going to start off by showing you the new agendas and minutes module, which, if you recall our last website, it had the tabbed browsing, so you had to click several times to get to where you're going. The exciting thing about our new site is that everything is just right here. So you want to view the video for the 25th Commission meeting, it pops right up. And then you have the agenda, the minutes, and if there's any large files, like the budget or something like that, we can actually include it when you click view details. We could have additional attachments if there's a document that we want to have available to the public. And there's no limit to how many we can add, so that is pretty nice.
On the videos, I noticed they're YouTube. Do we have to pay YouTube anything?
No, it's completely free.
It is.
So we're able to host them on there. Our PIO live streams to Facebook, and we were live streaming to YouTube, but we've stopped that so that we can focus on the Facebook and then upload the higher quality file to YouTube once it's ready.
YouTube charges nothing. They don't stop it after 20 minutes, give us a 20-second ad, and keep going or anything?
No, I believe since we're a government,
Okay.
they don't do the ads.
Okay.
But maybe with our new website, we'll start getting too many views.
Yeah.
So I'll move on. So let's say you're a developer, you're going to the planning page, and you're curious about permitting. So we're in planning. I'm interested in a sign permit. So here we have the applications, which you have to fill out in Adobe and then send in to Michelle upstairs. But you can submit your payment right here for that sign. And so in the application, it tells you how much you need to pay. So once this loads, we'll fill it in.
Is the loading for the payment a little slower than?
Not typically.
Okay.
I was just doing it in the audience, going through, and and it was popping right up. So, of course, when I've got an audience.
Yeah.
Oh, no internet.
Oh, it could be the internet on that machine, Taylor, too. Maybe it's just not,
No Wi, no Wi-Fi.
a little bit slow.
So maybe I'll come back to that. So on our new website, we have this great "How do I" tab. So when someone's just interested, how do I apply for a job? How do I make a payment? How do I report a pothole? So we're able to do these online forms.
Yeah, I did a code violation the other day.
Yeah, you can do a
On
code
that.
violation, you
That's
can
great.
file a ADA grievance. The great thing is, so you can literally fill it all in and say what your complaint is, 4th Street at limit.
Does that go
And
directly to the department head?
yeah, so
call?
we're able to customize who it goes to. So this would go to Colette and some of the other streets, like Becky Beaver, our streets
No, I didn't
superintendent.
get an email back on that. Tell me that, we put our email, yeah, we put our email on there, but I didn't
Yeah,
get an
you put your
back
email. I
saying
think
that
there
it
is a
had
way
been
to turn that
received.
on, so I'll look into that
Yeah,
for
see
you.
if it was received, so people know that their question's been received.
So.
I used it to report a pothole a couple weeks ago, or some potholes on 19th Street Terrace. Rather than call somebody and just put it in, and a couple days later, it was filled in.
You use the website?
I did it online. I think it was this website, yeah.
Yeah, it is really nice for citizens, especially if it's in the evening or something when
Yeah.
we're not open.
But you didn't get any notice that it was received?
I did not,
Your complaint
but,
was
you hit send and, I'm comfortable enough with the internet now, but if it goes, you'll get a bounce
yeah.
back if it doesn't. So
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily want one, but I just noticed 3 days later that
That it was
the
done?
potholes were filled.
I think it's a good idea, though, to get a confirmation.
Yeah, I'll look into
That's-
that.
That's a best practice, and before on our old website, you'd get it, so, for a
Right.
pothole, so.
So yeah, if it's either from staff or the system, we'll work that out. So let's say you're doing your sign permit. It's gonna be a permanent sign. So our sign permit fees, if it's a reface of a sign, north of the building. So it's half of what your original sign permit would be, so let's say it's $50. And then you just fill out your card info and submit, and you do get an email back when you submit a payment. And we have tested that. So now I am going to show you the municipal code integration. This was one of the things that really excited me with using Municode. They've served the city for over 40 years doing our municipal code. And so I'm interested in development regulations. And this is another neat feature. We're able to highlight certain content to go to the top of the list. So when someone types in dogs, development regulations, the appropriate, so grants, I've got the ability to do this on all of those. So you can click it and go to the page and learn about the development regulations and open them up. Or let's say I'm curious about development regulations and where it's mentioned in our municipal code. So I click that button and it takes us to our municipal code site. So there's a few things here about it, but actually maybe I'm now curious about dogs. So dangerous dogs, running at large. Okay, that's interesting. I'm gonna go back to the site and search for dogs by clicking that button and learn that I need a dog tag.
Yeah.
So then here's Carla's beautiful dogs. And,
Classy.
and it also tells me that my potbelly pig also needs one. So that's nice because you can go back and forth between the city site and the municipal code and search for things, and it's all interoperable.
So if I look for bees in there, it'll show bee permit.
Yeah. I don't think
Or
quite
not.
yet, but
I don't think we
yeah.
have one.
I'll buy it.
So then when you type in grants, I have the small business grant program to pop up, but then as you go down, you'll see a little bit more of the CDBG grants and other things. So I'm gonna go to our economic development page really quick. The nice thing on this website is that everything lives on a page. So when I am talking to a business or developer, they want a lot of applications, they want a lot of information. So I've been able to put this all right here on my front page, and I can just direct them to go to leavenworthks.org/ed, and they can get all of the things that they need. So now it's saving staff time rather than sending them
Yeah.
hundreds of emails a year of applications. And it's the most up-to-date information, so whenever these change, I'll just go back here and update it, and then we'll always have the newest thing on the website. We won't have pages hanging out there with the 2006 version and people submitting that, which was happening.
So when you make changes to the website and the web pages, can department heads do that? Does it have to go through the IT person, or what's the process? I mean,
It's very simple, and I might show you that
Right.
if we have time, but there's kind of almost like a web wizard type person in every
department.
division or department that can make updates. It's very easy. We've had a lot of people engaged with it, and it's so easy. It's literally the click of a button and they can change it. Melissa and I are able to see all of the changes, and you're able to revert back to previous versions if there was an issue. But it's so simple. Our last website, Melissa and I were pretty much, I think a couple other people, but we were primarily the ones that were going in and making the changes, and it was a lot more complex. So I will take you. So we've formed a new stormwater page as part of our new stormwater program. And it technically lives under the city manager page, but it has links in Public Works and other places. Charity, our assistant, made this, and she did a really nice job. It has all of the different reports, the ordinances, the maps, cost tables. But the neat thing is you're able to go in and look at all of these current projects, and she's keeping this updated and making the changes herself with coordination with the Public Works Department. So we're able to see here that the 14th and Pawnee Drainage Project started June 17th, ending late 2019. There's the project cost, and then we can even see the photos.
Cool.
So you're able to track the progress of the project, and we're excited to keep that updated too. So another thing that's really nice is our bids, RFPs, and RFQs module. That's another big thing that's asked for quite a bit. So when you go to it, you can click on
Oh, that's
that
great.
bid, and then the contract was awarded to Mojo and Yachts Lawn Care March 12th, and then you can go to the bid notice and read about it. And you can go see the bid tabulation. So there's the notice, there's your bid tab, and it's all very transparent and easy to use. And so we're putting all of there's our only open bid right now, the 2019 sidewalk. But you can click and look at the closed bids, awarded bids, new ones. But we're gonna keep that all updated and It's very, very interesting.
That is interesting.
So I'll show you the back end here just for 1 second, and show you how easy it is to make a change.
Typed it too fast, probably.
We had to change our password recently, so there we go. So let's say I want to make a change on the city manager page.
Like put your picture in there?
So I have these buttons now: view, edit, revisions. So under edit,
Yeah, it's like,
so you can just go in there and hit save, and then it's updated. So it's really easy for staff, and we're extremely pleased with it.
Insuring, insuring,
Good.
There was an error.
Any other
Sorry.
questions?
That's great, it's great, I enjoy playing with it. I don't know.
I like it better than the old one.
When you Google, you still see when you Google Leavenworth, Kansas, you still see the LVKS come up on Google.
So that's-
So does that change as more people use the new?
So it takes Google about a month to update all of their search results. So as this site is live longer,
It'll move up.
it'll populate all of our new pages, and the old ones will fall off. And so that's why we anticipate that we'll have at least double the traffic.
Great, that's great.
it's, Unicor was the company we worked with?
Unicode,
Unicode,
they're based out of Tallahassee, Florida.
yeah. So do they give us kind of maintenance on it in
Uh-huh.
terms of going forward after this development
Yeah,
stage?
so after the first year, which our maintenance was included, we'll pay the annual fee for the hosting and maintenance.
How much is that, I mean, do you know approximately how much that's gonna be? Or-
It's about 6,000, which is actually
That's not bad.
significantly less than we were paying. I think we were paying triple that. So.
Is that yearly?
Uh-huh.
In terms of the request for proposal and statement of work, I mean, obviously, there's big benefits to knowledge management that you just showed us in terms of just the city, in terms of its functioning, but was that one of the things that we put in the request for proposal and statement of work, or is that just the way it turned out? In terms of just being able to manage knowledge
Yeah.
and information?
As part of the RFQ that we did, we needed the agendas, a reasonable agendas module, and we needed a
Yeah.
good RFP module, and so all of the companies did have something, but I'm really pleased
Yeah,
with the
because it
ones
looks
that we
like
ended
it's
up with.
pretty easy to share that information, and it's right there, so,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Need a motion to open up for a special meeting?
So moved.
A second.
Motion has been seconded, begin voting with Commissioner Preisinger.
Aye.
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 Motion carried, 5-0. Open meeting. Consider bids for 10th Avenue pavement rehabilitation project.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, before I turn it over to our Public Works Director to talk about the bids and recommend awarding the contract for 10th Avenue, just briefly on 10th Avenue, I want to again reiterate the expedited manner in which this project was brought forward. It was identified by the commission. There was no funding stream through funding identified for Thornton Street and some bonding capacity. We identified to the commissioner, gave the commission an option. The commission went forward with that. We did a very quick RFQ process for firms to evaluate the project. We did interviews with a short window. We selected Trans Systems. Trans Systems worked very quickly to get a report to the commission with some options. The commission selected those options. And then again, we had a tight window and we pushed Trans Systems to design the project in an expedited manner, which they did. We sold our bonds. The project went out to bid. We again expedited the bid process with a narrow window. And just last week, we had a bid opening. So this whole process has been accelerated. I don't want to give the impression that we could do this on every project. 10th Avenue had some things going for it, the timing that we identified it, the relative simplicity of the project, once we got past some of the testing factors in it, and then some very good work by staff and by the contractor that we selected to move forward. We also expedited tonight's meeting. Normally, we would not open a bid on a Wednesday, because, little peek behind the covers, everything that's in an agenda is due to me on Thursday before, so they essentially had to turn the policy report around in 4 hours the next morning. So we're moving very quickly. We've already met with some school district personnel about that. The one answer we don't have for you tonight is the start date. We'll, over the next week, as we work with the contractor, we start talking about materials delivery. They're manufacturing a large amount of asphalt for this, and it's a little bit of an upgraded asphalt, which we spec'd out for this project. So I'm gonna I'm probably stolen most of the thunder at this point, but I just wanted to let you know that we will not tonight, maybe by the end of the week, early next week, have a much better timeline for you. So I'll turn it over to our Public Works Director.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor and Commission, we do have Phil McNinney of McNinney Construction here this evening, who is the low bid that we recommend the commission award the project to. Some other things that kind of play into this, we did receive two really good bids, just a few $1,000s apart, which we felt was a good sign. There's a lot of work going on in Leavenworth in the next 6 weeks. The work on 20th Street's getting ready to get started. The bid for Thornton we expect to bring to the commission next week with recommendation for approval. And this project, the asphalt is really the key to success on this, and that's one of the reasons that we're talking about. We're not sure of the start date, because it's a fairly specific, a narrowly defined asphalt that's not normally used on smaller projects. The highway departments use it, and they use a lot of it, but our asphalt companies need to make it for our project and have it tested, make sure it meets the requirements before they can use it. The turnaround time for that can be as long as 8 weeks. We're hoping to get it in the 2 to 3 week range. And then our contractor said that if we were able, he could start work next week or even this week. He's looking for projects of this type to go to work on. So it's a moving thing. But the project is basically we're milling 3 inches off of existing concrete, which should get below the vast majority of the currently defective, deteriorated concrete. Putting back a 3-inch super pave asphalt that is what they've used on the interstates. It costs them more, not vast amounts more, but it's meaningfully more than the asphalt we normally use. And there's some very specific ways to seal the joints that the state has used on the interstate. And I've been trying, when I go to Kansas City, I try to drive that way to see if I continue to believe that it's holding up. And around the Turner Diagonal on I-70, it's been down 6 years, and it looks really, really good. And that just gets the holy heck beat out of it every day by large and small vehicles. The school district, we're going to be impacting a lot of their schools with all of our projects. We've already had a meeting with the staff. We'll be having follow-up meetings with them once we know more about the dates. But yes, 10th Avenue, this project, Thornton, and some of our other projects are going to impact the schools. We try to avoid that, but this year, the magnitude of the projects, it's kind of unavoidable. And as important as this one was, they understand why we're doing what we're doing. There's part of the contract that McNinney currently has is the parking lot over here at City Hall. I think we stuck our necks out and said they're going to start on July 29th. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah, they've actually asked to move that out a couple more weeks to give them time to work on this.
Yeah, we put the City Hall parking lot at the bottom of the priority list for any of the work that they're doing on our projects. So it's going to be an exciting time. relatively speaking, it's a mill and overlay project. At the end of the day, when they've done mill, you're gonna be able to drive to and from. You know, you're gonna be able to do it for the most part while they're working. Same with the paving. They're gonna pave some of it, and that evening you'll be able to drive on it. So it's not a huge disruption like a complete reconstruction of a street. You should see a fairly quick turnaround from start to finish on the milling and start to finish on the paving. They're not gonna be doing both at the same time, though.
So the total projected time for the total project, or, I mean, do we have a month, 6 weeks?
Joe, why don't you come on up?
Well, we had 30 days in there to do it.
How many? 30? Okay.
30 days.
Okay.
So I'm doing 20th Street right now. We're doing concrete patching on there, and that gonna take 2 weeks to do that. And then once I get in there, let's say in 3 weeks, I'll be able to mill it, about 4 or 5 days and pave it back in 4 or 5 days. And then, if we can get this mixed design approved, which, I think it's a good idea to go with this higher grade of oil. But we don't typically use that, so these mixed designs take a while. But anyway, hopefully we can get 20th Street done in a relatively quick manner and then jump right over to 10th Street, knock it out, and be out of your hair, so.
Parking lot.
Well, the parking lot too, I mean, I wanna be able to get in
After
here,
school starts.
get in here and get out. I am not gonna drag it out, right? I mean, I got the guys lined up. When they come in, they're gonna come in, a little bit of storm sewer here on the east end, a little bit of concrete work, and then I pave it, stripe it,
Yep.
so.
We're looking forward to in and out, and they'll go home for the rest of the year, leave us alone.
Well,
And the estimate in terms of the time of when you start on 10th Avenue would be sometime in August, right?
right now, that's what it's looking, right? And I think the other component too was the streetlight cameras that they're gonna put in there too.
Oh,
We're upgrading the traffic
yeah, I
signal
saw
in
that. I saw that.
Pennsylvania.
That's good.
So, and that's a good idea too. And so that process too, getting the materials, is gonna take a little time. So this delay may be a good thing, but certainly when we get in here, we'll knock it out as quickly as possible, so.
And I'd like to make a point, just tying back to the infrastructure manual. 7 of the 18 items on this bid sheet are markings. Now, I know it's only $20,000, but that's why one of the reasons I made the comment about that, so.
And just to reiterate, 10th Street is from Michigan south to limit, or is it from Ohio south to limit?
Michigan to Vilas.
Vilas.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
What's
And
that?
that's where it
2 miles?
washboards quite a bit.
Is that about 2 miles, or is it?
Michigan
Mile?
Miles.
I wouldn't even say it's a mile.
A mile.
Not even a mile.
Yeah.
Less than a mile,
It's a mile.
Mile.
this phase.
It's a mile. Yeah, at least a mile. Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. And did we, came in under the estimate of the engineer's estimate, right, as far as the cost? Yeah.
Well, if no other comments, I entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the low bid received from McEnany Construction, not to exceed $478,229.49 for the 10th Avenue Rehabilitation Project.
Second.
Motion has been seconded. Begin voting with Commissioner Bowder.
Aye.
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 Motion carried 5-0. A motion to close the special meeting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been seconded. Begin voting with Commissioner Priceinger.
Aye.
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 Motion carried 5-0. Are there any other discussions or comments among the
We're
commissioners?
closed. Meeting's closed.
What does that got to do
You
with it?
adjourned it.
Oh, so we're done?
We can't talk now.
I didn't say adjourn.
You said adjourn.
Well, peace, we out. Meeting adjourned.